my friends, welcome. You are listening to Over Keto, your non-diet podcast that stands up against diet culture so you can make peace with food and your body and eat the goddamn carbs without anxiety and guilt. If you struggle to stop thinking about eating, if you feel anxious or out of control around food and feel uncomfortable in your body, this is your safe space for the next 20 odd minutes, free from assumptions, free from judgment, whatever your body shape or size. I'm Mel Wakeman, registered nutritionist, intuitive eating practitioner, non-diet counsellor, and lover of cheese and onion crisps. I specialise in disordered eating, recovering from chronic dieting, body dissatisfaction, and eating disorder recovery through a weight-inclusive lens. You can find me on social media where I share lots of free non-diet and recovery content. Please note, however, that particularly my Instagram, it's for educational purposes only. It isn't therapy or a substitute for medical care. But please feel to drop me a message if you've got a question for me or you just need to rant. Now, this is part 2 of episode 18 coming up, the true cost of weight loss drugs. And like part 1, I declared this could be very triggering listening. Are we talking about weight loss? Are we talking about numbers and obesity? So skip this one if you feel it's not what you need to hear right now. If you're staying, great. Go put the kettle on. What's coming up in this episode is right around the corner. In this episode, I'll be continuing the story of the weight loss drug saga with Saxenda and Wegovy. I'm going to uncover more of the sneaky, disgusting behaviours of the weight loss drug industry. I'll tell you about past drugs that have been withdrawn because they weren't safe. And I'll be sharing more about the harms caused by the more recent Saxenda and Wegovy. I'll show you how they misled us with their quote-unquote benefits by misreporting the data, and how the definition of long-term sustainable weight loss is so very different when it's coming from a drug company compared to a qualified health practitioner that is weight inclusive. I also want to give you my thoughts on the American Academy of Pediatrics recommending these weight loss drugs and bariatric surgery for kids. We have a lot to get through. So please know before we carry on, if you have taken weight loss drugs, if you're on them now or thinking about starting, there is no judgment from me. It's the same with having or wanting weight loss surgery. I respect you. But if you've been hearing and seeing snippets about these drugs and you're feeling really confused right now, this episode is for you. And if you're being encouraged to take these drugs, I'll help you advocate for yourself and work out what's best for you in the pick and mix at the end. So let's cut a slice of cake and dig in. We left part 1 when I was just about to reveal the weight loss in the drug trial participants who took Saxenda and Wegovy. Now, by the weigh-ins, there had been significant dropouts from both trials due to some pretty horrific side effects. I talked about these last episode, mostly digestive problems, some debilitating. But it was almost like, I don't know, as if folk are supposed to suck it up because, hey, the ultimate goal or sign of success is a reduced BMI. Like, don't worry about feeling utter shit. It'll all be worth it. But will it? Now, 6% of the Saxenda and almost 10% of the Wegovy group had serious adverse events that included things like gallstones, blocked gallbladders, and pancreatitis. Both studies reported a worrying rise in pancreatitis markers, something that we know can predispose folk to developing pancreatic cancer. And both studies reported increases in resting heart rate, which I found rather odd. Now, at the end of the Saxenda studies, that was at week 56, the folk who were left, that is, had lost an average of 8% of their body weight. So it kind of sounds maybe, successful in the terms of a drug company. The placebo group in this trial, so basically the folks who just dieted, so they had to reduce their calorific intake and they had their one-to-one counselling, they lost an average of 2.6% of their body weight. When we look at the difference between those two groups, if my maths is correct, That's a 5.4% difference. Now, a drug company must show their drug produces a minimum of 5% weight loss compared to placebo in order to put it on the market, which means Saxenda just scraped through by less than 0.5%. And let's not forget, that's the people that were still in it. A third of the people in the Saxenda group didn't make the 5% weight loss. So this is sounding like an awful lot of effort and suffering for very little return. There was around twice the weight loss in the Wegovy group, which is, I guess when you think about it, not surprising if you're throwing up, can't eat and having the shits. Now, 86% lost at least 5% of their body weight, and their study went for 68 weeks. And so, Novo would say a resounding success. But when you look at the data, and this is on top of all of the side effects, so I'll put a link in the show notes for the research paper. And when you look at figure 1, the weight loss had really started to slow down by week 60. But the study stopped at week 68. So 2 months later, we got no more data, which in weight loss research is not uncommon at all. And like so many weight loss studies and drug trials, this was a short one. So when they are claiming sustained weight loss, it really isn't. And you know what? They had weight regain as soon as the drug was stopped. Now, they don't want to talk about weight regain. It wasn't even mentioned in the main Saxenda paper. You had to go to a supplementary appendix, press some more buttons to find it. Now, that showed when the participants switched from Saxenda to the placebo, they started regaining weight. And interestingly, even the participants who stayed on Saxenda for another 3 months were actually starting to put weight back on. And people need to know this. This isn't something to hide. Now, for Wegovy, there was a much smaller, year-long follow-up study of the participants. So there were just 327 people that they followed after they stopped taking the drug. And you know what? The participants regained 2/3 of the weight that they had lost. And the people who lost the most weight tended to regain the most weight and more quickly. This is classic weight cycling. It's incredibly harmful to the body. And ironically, it is a factor that drives insulin resistance, the very thing that these drugs are trying to challenge. And it's what we see in terms of weight cycling with all other intentional weight loss methods. So these kind of game changers and magic bullets and miracles, these injectables, they are not immune to this outcome. So when we look at what happens with all of this appetite suppression, okay, the outcome is that people are eating less. Okay, that's one of the ways in which this weight loss is coming about. And we know through weight science that not eating enough causes the body to compensate. It releases hunger hormones and it slows the metabolism. And that can be some of the things that can contribute to weight regain. Weight regain is the body defending its set point after the weight loss. It's biology. Because the intentional weight loss methods are not sustainable. As soon as you stop those injections, the physiological alteration that they are causing stops. And then whether it's the emotional and physical demands required that become unmanageable, the body's going to go back to doing what it was before. Or the prescriptions have to stop because there's a limited prescription time, or the money runs out. It's going to mean that your body goes right back to what it was doing before. And the thing that is often ignored by pharma is that some bodies are not meant to be thin. Drug companies and healthcare systems seem to refuse to acknowledge this, or that there are complex histories evident in people's backgrounds, with difficult life experiences, with trauma, inadequate coping tools to cope with difficult emotions and these difficult events. The common causes of binge eating disorder, bulimia nervosa and anorexia nervosa, whether that's typical or atypical. Food restriction is still likely to contribute to erratic eating or binge eating, whether that you're on, an injectable or not. And the really frustrating is that this is something that Novo Nordisk are now looking into with Saxenda as a possible treatment for binge eating disorder. I guess the dollar signs are flashing because binge eating disorder is the most common eating disorder amongst folk with type 2 diabetes. But starving someone is not an effective treatment for what essentially is a mental health issue. These drugs are encouraging and enabling restriction that is still likely to lead to restrict binge cycles, that is problematic for mental and physical health, that can play into unstable blood sugars, even with these drugs, that can be dangerous with existing insulin resistance. And you might want to go back to listening to episode 15 about diabetes and weight inclusivity on this. So how unethical is it to ask someone with an eating disorder, because they aren't screened adequately, to follow a restrictive diet, because that's what goes alongside using these injectables, that may actually make their eating behaviours worse? And I've seen so many and received many anecdotal reports of these drugs having no effect on binge eating at all. So the belief that just restriction stops binge eating is it's ludicrous. So to quote some responses that I've received, it didn't help with my binging at all. I was constantly hungry, thinking about food and eating up all of my emotions. No, it does not work for me, because while I may be full, if I really want to binge, I will binge. I just feel incredibly sick afterwards. It was the horrid nausea to start, and as I increased the dose, I felt vile. I think it also caused a very big dip in my mental health. I started self-harming. My diabetes improved so much, and I did lose some weight. In my mind, it's an awful medication. I might also add that it exasperated my MS symptoms. I want to touch on the appetite suppression, the not feeling hungry bit some more, because we live in a world that celebrates having no desire to eat, that seeks not feeling hungry, that even feeling nauseated at the thought or sight of food is a good thing or a silver lining, like it almost deserves a trophy. What often sits behind this desire to not eat is a lack of trust around food. Fear of eating too much, fear of feeling out of control, gaining weight, feeling shameful, being actively discriminated against, purely on the basis of body size. It doesn't make trying to shift into body acceptance very easy, does it? To just love yourself in a society that isn't loving or accepting at all, that holds folk to ransom by being refused access to specialists until they lose weight. Oh, but they'll offer weight loss surgery whilst the extent of side effects are either not discussed at all or they're minimised to the point it's seen as a minimal risk option. It isn't. Where weight loss is the sole criteria for success, that ignores the human beneath, pretending to care about people in larger bodies while you pathologise them by calling folk obese. So when the American Academy of Pediatrics announced they support the use of weight loss drugs in children as young as 12 and weight loss surgery in children as young as 13, and support the use of behaviour modification counselling, aka go on a diet, as young as 2, I wanted to cry. I hear from clients all the time who were put on a diet. I think my youngest was 3, okay? And it's just a lifetime of fighting. It's insane. This kind of Suggestion is setting children up for a lifetime of disordered eating, weight cycling, body dissatisfaction, and it puts them at a high risk of developing an eating disorder. Adolescence is a particularly high risk developmental stage for ED. High weight children are at a greater risk of eating disorders. Dieting and weight loss attempts are some of the strongest predictive triggers for eating disorders. So trying to change your body so that existing is easier is valid, right? That's what I used to think. I fought to be seen. I wanted to be noticed, to be heard. It took me a long time to realise and understand it wasn't me that was the problem. And I have never lived in a bigger body. So I will never know how hard that is. Now, whilst I was working that out, there was absolutely no joy around food, just anxiety. And that made me unwell. My body was malnourished, so was my mind. I had no way of dealing with physical or emotional hunger other than continue to try to ignore them. Food bloated me out and made me feel uncomfortable because I was starving my body, which meant my relationship with food spiraled, and that left me empty, unfulfilled, and unhappy. Now, my solution, as is the case for so many, was to eat and work on healing my relationship with food and my body. So no, I don't think these weight loss drugs are going to be the solution so many desperately want them to be. And sadly, I think when folks start to realise these drugs aren't the miracles they have been sold as, the individual, not the drug company or the drug, will be blamed. Folk will be shamed for not being disciplined enough, for not having enough willpower, or simply not wanting it enough. And that's so wrong. The bottom line here is we don't know what happens to folk who take these drugs. Not enough people have been tested. The studies have not been lasting long enough. There has not been adequate follow-up. But the drug companies are laughing all the way to the bank with their quote-unquote incredible weight loss and quote-unquote health improvements, dismissing the side effects, the risks, and the adverse health outcomes. And these health improvements are marginal at best. So get this. Novo said the HbA1c, which is an average measure of blood glucose, was reduced. Woohoo, they're going, diabetes is cured. The truth was it reduced HbA1c by a measly 0.1 units, millimoles per mole, in 12 months. That is insignificant. And we don't know what happens beyond that. Novo said the cholesterol, triglycerides, which is the sort of measure of the dietary fats and inflammation markers, all improved. What they didn't tell you was that they were already in the normal range at the start of the study. And they stayed there. The participants were metabolically fine. The drug didn't improve anything. And there's buckets of evidence that says taking these drugs can be risky. Folk have died. A number of them had to be withdrawn from the market, not because they didn't work, but because they weren't safe. Yet the benefit of the doubt is still being given to the drug company. Since 1933, drug companies have been trying to, quote unquote, help folk get thin. It began with DNP, an industrial chemical. It's a thermogenic agent that supposedly promoted weight loss by increasing the metabolic rate. But when there were such serious adverse reactions reported, and things were like a dangerously high body temperature, so much so that 12 people died, it was banned in 1938. Then came the appetite suppressants in the form of amphetamines. These are stimulants that basically set your central nervous system on speed dial whilst depressing your appetite. They were kind of used as the cure-all, particularly for mental health problems. The weight loss thing was a benefit. They were massively oversubscribed, even though they were highly addictive and causing dangerously high heart rates and blood pressures. The amphetamine epidemic in the United States began in the 1940s and ran through the 60s. It was absolutely generated by the pharmaceutical industry and the medical profession. And it looks like history keeps on repeating itself. Now, an amphetamine derivative called fenfluramine came about in the 1970s. Its appetite suppressant effect meant it was used for weight loss, but the loss was kind of short-lived, and it was then discontinued for that use anyway, due to what's called cardiovascular toxicity. It was toxic to the heart. Not that it was binned, because back in 1990, it had a return. Fenfluramine was combined with another drug called phentermine, providing a similar action and creating what became known as fen-phen, along with greater weight loss promises and claims of fewer side effects. It was marketed really heavily, but hey, due to causing fatal pulmonary hypertension and heart valve problems, it was withdrawn in 1997. So it was out there for plenty long enough, with legal damages of over $13 billion. Sibutramine, another one, sold as or named Reductil, was approved just in 1998 for weight loss, also by reducing appetite, and then withdrawn from the market in 2010 because of the side effects that included an increased risk of heart attacks and cardiac deaths. Now, apparently it's around this time that drug safety became more critical. I should bloody well hope so. As weight loss drug use shifted from shorter term, 8 to 12 week prescriptions to longer term. This was around the time that Orlistat or Xenical came on the market. So in 1998, this was the time you could buy a pill or get a pill that helped you reduce fat absorption in the gut. The downside to that was you got really fatty, oily poos that don't flush. You experience anal leakage, wind with discharge or follow through, and fecal incontinence. That ain't nice, is it? And they keep coming. There's Rimonabant. That was the next new miracle drug that also worked by reducing appetite, this time blocking a kind of cannabinoid receptor in the brain. That was approved here in Europe in 2006, but it was pulled just 2 years later because the drug was linked to serious psychiatric side effects, including suicidal ideations. We're still going. Lorcaserin, otherwise known as Belvic, was another one pulled in 2020 after 8 years of being on the market because it increased a whole range of cancers, but particularly pancreatic, colorectal and lung cancer. So here we are with Wegovy and Saxenda, still reducing appetite. Again, listen to part 1 when I explain how and why and all of that. This time with an injectable. This should only be available on prescription. But it seems if you're willing to spend some cash, then cash speaks volumes. And demand is not declining, probably because the weight regain has been brushed under the carpet. So what we're seeing now is Novo Nordisk's main competitor, Eli Lilly, come out with their version of Wegovy, and they call it tirzepatide, and it's sold under the name Mounjaro. It works like Wegovy, similar mechanism of action, but it's kind of got a turbo boost to give a more potent appetite reduction effect and, quote unquote, more favourable results, i.e. percentage weight loss achieved in a lowered HbA1c, although don't know by how much yet. But again, at what cost? Side effects were the main reason participants pulled out of the drug trials. And what we find is when you kind of double whammy the mechanisms and the dosages, they get worse. Tirzepatide was licensed for use for type 2 diabetes here in the UK in October last year, 2022. And I imagine it won't be long for it to be licensed for weight loss under another brand name, just like Ozempic became Wegovy and Victoza became Saxenda. And just like these, tirzepatide can cause thyroid cancer. Tirzepatide can cause pancreatitis, which can increase the risk of pancreatic cancer, as well as gallbladder problems, kidney failure, stomach problems, and so on. And as I've done my research, I'm wanting to know what happens when the pancreas keeps getting buzzed to make more insulin. That's one of the ways, this drug is working. It suppresses appetite, but it also is kind of activating the pancreas. Because if we keep getting prodded, there comes a point where we just kind of pack it up, don't we? Give in. Is anyone looking at that risk? The risk that these drugs may well create insulin-dependent diabetes whilst they're trying to treat and manage type 2 diabetes. These drugs are looking more dangerous than the conditions they are being used to treat, especially when we exclude the weight stigmatizing belief that body size is a disease, that pathologizing a body type justifies prescribing a drug that has no long-term efficacy is inhumane. I've spent the last week watching a docuseries called Dope Sick. Michael Keaton's in it. Watch it. It's based on a non-fiction book called Dope Sick, Dealers, Doctors and the Drug Company That Addicted America by Beth Macy. It is about the American opioid addiction following the release of the drug OxyContin. It's a hard watch, but boy, it opened my eyes about the potentially untouchable power pharma had in the past. Corruption, lies, not even allegedly, and the power of money. It made me feel a bit sick because I don't trust them now. So, okay, I'm drawing a line. It's that time. Before I wear out your ears, we need to go into the pick and mix. Let's look at a selection of tips and tools you can dip into as you please as you create your own personalized toolkit to help you heal your relationship with food in your body. Back in just a second. I had a conversation just last week with someone who couldn't decide what to do. I've literally tried and done everything, she said. I'm so confused and triggered right now. What do I do? How do I decide? Now, a weight loss drug is not something I would recommend taking, but it's also not my decision. Even though they won't work for everyone, all of them have side effects and none of them are risk-free. Body autonomy is a human right. So in order to make your own decision about your own life and your future, you need to have the information you need. And I hope this episode has helped provide this. But you also need to consider you based on your lived experiences. Now, diet culture says you can lose weight, therefore you should. Now, what if you asked yourself these 4 questions first? 1. Am I prepared to sacrifice my physical health through the likely side effects to shrink my body? Do I have the capacity to do that? Number 2, am I prepared to accept that any weight loss is likely to be temporary and may cause me to regain more weight than I lost and negatively affect my mental health when I stop? Number 3, how do I think this approach to weight loss is going to be different for me? Number 4, if I've attached my self-worth to love, my relationships, what people think about me and my health, is a weight loss drug really what I'm looking for? Or do my needs go deeper than that? Not easy questions, I know. And only you will have the answers. And this requires honesty with yourself. Now, back in episode 6, I tackled the question, I get that diets don't work, but I still want to lose weight. How do I get over this? You may also find what lies beneath the number on the scale helpful. That was episode 2. There's some thought-provoking stuff in there and some tools. And I want you to know you matter. You deserve peace and you deserve to take up the space you need to in this world too. So that is it for this episode, my friends. Thank you for joining me. If you want to get in touch, you can email your thoughts and questions to me at mel@wakecomeandnutrition.com, or come find me on Instagram or LinkedIn or TikTok. Now, join me next time while I'll be tackling food healthification. You know that thing where it goes, make your favorite snacks and desserts delicious and guilt-free. Well, they made me miserable. It took me a while to realize that guilt is not an ingredient. So I will be delving into the world of dairy-free, sugar-free, egg-free, low-carb, organic, vegan, avocado, chocolate mousses and the like. and how that can leave you feeling really devoid of satisfaction and joy. And it can play into disordered relationships with food. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Know that you are enough, always, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.